Welcome back to another round of Bases Picks. As always, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, a colleague, a relative, an associate, an enemy, any and all in between. It is appreciated. Now, two fight cards, both on at the same time, but different sides of the world. It's not something that happens that often, but on this occasion, that's where we're at. I guess there's a lot more significance in one fight over the other, but maybe there's a lot more fun to be had on one of the fight cards over the other. So what I'm gonna do, because I feel like I know what's the most important fight of the weekend for me personally, I'm saving that specific thing till last. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna talk about the undercard briefly of the Conor Benn versus Pete Dobson fight, and then I'm going to talk about that main event. Then I'm going to get to the undercard of the boxer event and then talk about the main event of that fight. So without further ado, let's get into it. So on this card, you've got several of Matchroom's, I guess, their young cohort, the new sort of British prospects on there. Obviously, they're getting a taste of the high life over in Las Vegas. They're going to be on extremely early on the card. I'm assuming by Vegas time, they might have started boxing at like 10:30 a.m., which probably be a new experience for them, especially if they have acclimatized to the time difference and they actually wanted to get up at say 7:30, 8 o'clock. Well, yeah, to be boxing 2 hours later. It'll be interesting, but let's see how they get on. Jimmy Sains, George Liddard, I've got no idea about their opponents, so I can't say anything other than I'm expecting this just to be a new experience for them, a run out, and that they actually, you know, sort of get that, you know, that grounding from the other side of the world, which hopefully works on their pro journeys. Moving a little bit further away from that, you've got Johnny Fisher, who's obviously trained by Mark Tibbs, and he's taking on Demetrius Bezos, who in his last fight, I believe it was, got knocked out in the second round by David Adilier. And I am assuming that in this particular fight, something similar will happen. He's a pretty handy operator, but he has a habit of leaving his hands low, especially when he's up close. And I think in that instance, you'll get a situation where someone like Johnny Fisher will be able to find that target. And as big as and strong as he is, I can see him basically getting extremely close to Bezos and not allowing him to put in any real work or graft. So I am expecting it to last less than 3 rounds, whether it's in the first or the second, or in the third. Yeah, that it doesn't go past the third in my particular opinion. Moving a bit further up is where things get a little bit more interesting. So you've got Khalil Cole against Juan Gerardo Osuna. Now, many people know I've been fairly high on Khalil Cole since his pro debut. I knew about his amateur background and I've liked sort of his skill sets. I wasn't a big fan of how maybe he conducted himself in the first few fights of his career, just in terms of the unprofessionalism, but you know, they was young, had time to grow, and I feel like he's actually implemented that in this moment. So since then, there hasn't been any slip-ups from him, and ultimately you've got to take people on what have you done for me lately, as opposed to how things were in the start. He looks like he's taking things a lot more serious, and this is only his 8th fight. I believe he's 7-0-1 with 5 KOs, I believe. So he's you know, he's pretty handy, as you can see. You know, 5 out of his 8 fights have ended in a stoppage. But this is obviously gonna also be his hardest opponent. Juan Osuna, 20-0, 18 KOs. He's Mexican, so the assumption is the majority of his bouts have taken place in Mexico. But the domestic level in Mexico is of a much higher and brutal standard as it is in several other countries. I feel like Mexico and probably South Africa are the 2 hardest domestic level areas, whereby once you leave that domestic level, you're either the cream of the crop or you're extremely jaded by the amount of wars and the amount of beatings that you've had to go through. So Osasuna, while I don't know the level of the competition that he's been fighting, I do feel like he's going to bring it. Obviously he believes in his power, so he's going to be looking to test Khalil Cole from early, but skills pay the bills, as they say, and I do think that Khalil Cole's got the skills in this one. I also think he's got the punch power. I think he's got enough to stop Osuna from just barreling forward. I don't know how durable Osuna is. I've never seen any of any of his fights to determine how well he can take a shot or whatnot. But I do think that in this particular fight, you'll get Khalil Cole winning a points decision, maybe unanimous, maybe majority, but I do see him sort of coming through in pretty good fashion and moving on to the next one. After that, you've got Austin Amo Williams against Armel Mbumba Yasser. Now, he is a last-minute replacement for Conor Coyle, who I believe was, I think he was 17-0 with 9 KOs at the time. Austin Williams is like 15-0 with, I think, 12 KOs or something like that. So he's definitely, obviously, the favorite here. Now, Mbumba, I've not seen him. As I said, he's a last-minute replacement. He seems very confident, but he's 10-0, undefeated. I think he's got 8 KOs on his record, so he's coming in with all the confidence. He believes that this is his time. So I can't really call it from a fair point of view. All I can really say is I'm going to assume that Austin Amo Williams is going to have enough to get through this test. I'm tentatively at this point, I was leaning towards a points decision against Coyle, and I'm going to stay that way, either a points decision or a late stoppage around about the 9th, around about round 9 or 10. But I've got nothing to really go off on that one. So, take that one with a pinch of salt. But I do expect Austin Amo Williams to carry on and win this fight. Okay, so moving to the main event, you got Conor Benn against Pete Dobson, or Peter, however you want to say it. Now, Dobson is 16-0 with 9 KOs, and Conor Benn, I believe, is 18-0. No, sorry, I think Conor Benn's 22-0, 14 KOs. Yeah, 22-0, 14 KOs. So he's had a bit more of the pro experience. Dobson has been unfortunate. There were 2 prior Matchroom opponents who did pull out of fights with him back in 2022 and 2023. He has been fighting in the Team Combat League, that 1 round apiece thing that has been going on since I think 2022 as well. So while he hasn't had any 12-round experience or 10-round experience in sort of the last year and a half, the last 18 months, he has seen some form of action. Now, he lost, I think he had 4 bouts, and I think he's lost 3 out of the 4. But when you look at him, from the footage I've seen and some of the fights he's been in, he very much looks like a slow starter, someone that's defensively aware and astute early on, sort of first couple rounds, and then starts to build his way into the fight, work his rhythm, start to break his opponents down, start to counter them. So I can see how a 1-round fight doesn't really benefit him. But for the activity and I guess for the training, it was good. It was good work for him, and clearly he's still looking in pretty decent shape. Now, this fight was supposed to be at 150 initially, then it got moved to 147, then it got brought back to 150. So whether that means that Conor Benn was having issues making the 147 weight, or maybe he didn't want to put his body through the stresses for a fight that ultimately doesn't quote unquote mean anything at this stage. Maybe he wants to slowly build his way back down to 147. I'm not sure. Or maybe he just can't make the weight. Who knows? Well, I guess we'll find out on fight night. Now, I guess the clearest way that you see that this fight is won or lost is whether or not Conor Benn can get off to an early start and affect Dobson from early. If he comes out all guns blazing in the first round and Dobson doesn't have an answer for him, then this probably end up being a very short fight inside 5 rounds. But if he comes out all guns blazing and Dobson is able to counter, is able to, quell the fire, slow him down a bit, then it could actually get a bit tasty going down the home stretch. I do think based on what I've seen of Dobson, while he's not very fast, he doesn't have fast hands or fast feet, he does seem to have very good defense and pretty good timing. He does have a propensity to fall over his front foot from what I've seen, trying to reach for shots, but I don't know if that was whether it was like the start of the rounds or the end of the round, so I'll have to give him a bit of grace on that. It also, we need to find out, you know, the Orozco fight didn't really tell us whether or not Conor had quote-unquote power or not, because again, Orozco, very tough Mexican, naturally bigger guy. Usually, you know, Mexicans take a good shot, and outside of that, we then found out that he failed a PED test after their fight, so no telling what it was, whether it was a, you know, a weight cutting agent, whether it was maybe something that gives you a little extra energy, extra stamina, so maybe the shots just weren't having the same effect as were usual. Who knows? But with regards to this one, I actually do think that, and this could end up being stupid in hindsight, but I think this might actually be a fairly tough test for Conor. I do think he's gonna win, but I've predicted for him to win on points in my combat league, so I'm going to remain with that, just based on what I've seen from Dobson, that I feel like he's got good defense. I don't see him getting flustered in sort of that first or second round, but I mean, look, stranger things have happened. I could say all this, and then he gets knocked out with the very first punch that lands in the first 5 seconds of the fight. So I don't know, I can't give it as much of a credence as I want to, but I do think that he is a pretty good operator, pretty crafty, and from what I've seen, I feel like he'll at least be defensively responsible in the first few rounds of the fight. So the prediction from me is Conor Benn on points. Okay, so look, moving over to the boxer card taking place at the OVO at Wembley. Yeah, so the undercard itself, there's no real fights of note except for maybe the chief support, whereby you say that anyone has any form of jeopardy. But look, let's go through it. I think the most intriguing match would actually be Jamie TKV against Konstantin Dobchenko, purely because obviously he did the upset over Matty Harris in I think it was 2 fights ago. Matty Harris blew a gas tank and obviously got stopped on his feet by the referee. Dobchenko, from what I can remember, has never actually been stopped. He obviously took Moses Atalma the distance, and he has upset a couple of people in the past. You've got Jamie TKV coming off of a shock upset loss against Igor Macedo. It was a stoppage loss, but it wasn't like he got knocked out or anything. It was just a very, it was a brutal right hand that basically opened up a very nasty cut over the top of his eye. They saw it immediately, took him to the doctor. Doctor waved it off straight away. So, you know, that kind of loss is, I guess, is all right. It's easier to come back from mentally than actually getting knocked out. It's like, well, you know, you didn't stop me, the doctor stopped me, he wouldn't let me carry on, I wanted to carry on, kind of thing. The question will be, will TKV have the stamina to manage the rounds and to go? I'm not sure exactly what it is, whether it's a 8-rounder or actually I think it might be a 6-rounder. So if it's a 6-rounder, personally, if it's 6 rounds, I see it going the distance. I do see TKV probably eking out 4 rounds to 2, maybe 5 rounds to 1 if his stamina can hold up. The issues he had with Macedo is because Macedo is obviously a taller, rangier guy and had more, I guess, more of an amateur experience than TKV was expecting. So this one, while he's got a wealth of amateur experience and a wealth of pro experience, he's a smaller guy. So I can see, you know, if Jamie wants to stick more on the outside to the mid-range and sort of fight in that vein, then he should make it a fairly comfortable night's work for him. Francesca Hennessy, I've never seen her opponent, so I can't comment on how good she is. I think she's like 5-5-1 or something like that. Fran Hennessy is her 3rd professional bout. I expect her to come through it. I expect it to be a points decision, as is usually the case. I mean, to be honest, the first fight she did have, even though it ended up being a knockout as such, it was a very flimsy stoppage by the referee, in my opinion. So I think this one will sort of go the same route as the second fight, but yeah, overall very sort of dominant. I think it's a 6-rounder, so quite dominant 6-round victory. Again, 5 rounds to 1, 6 rounds to 0, that sort of thing. Ben Whittaker against Khalid Gradia. Now this fight will be interesting from the perspective that Gradia, I think he's only been stopped twice in 13 losses I think he's had. And if I remember correctly, Gradia is the person that upset Carol Atalma at York Hall. So when we sort of look, he's got a decent, was it Gradia? Hold on, I need to double check that. Or did Carol Atalma win that? Yeah, no, Carol Atalma lost that fight. It wasn't him. It was I know who it was. Apologies to Carol and any of his mates. Yeah, it was Moderna that upset him. But yeah, Gradia has been points with Atalma. He went points with Dan Azeez. He's also gone points with Ezra Taylor as well. So he's pretty well versed in the sort of in the light heavyweight game. The only person that's was able to stop him of recent was Zach Parker, and I think that was a corner stoppage, retirement in the corner for some reason. I can't remember the exact scenario behind it, but yeah, that was that. So Ben Whittaker's looking to basically do a better job than his contemporaries, Ezra Taylor, Dan Azeez, Carol Atalma, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs. I do expect a comfortable win, whether he gets the stoppage or not, but I do think that there is a potential that towards the back half of this fight, I think it's an 8-rounder, so probably round 6 or 7, I can see him maybe opening up Khalid Gradia, getting the stoppage victory there. Caroline Dubois against Miranda Reyes. Now, from what I remember, Reyes was a last-minute substitute within sort of the last 2 weeks for Caroline, or either last-minute substitute or they drafted her in at sort of late notice for the fight. Miranda from Texas, Houston, Texas. She seems happy to be here, seems very confident, sort of not the most bold in terms of, you know, speaking, but she gives off an energy that she's, you know, that she's not just here to sort of pick up a paycheck. That being said, she has lost before. She's I think is 8-1-1 at the minute as a pro. So yeah, she knows what it's like to lose, and technically she's lost to lesser competition than Caroline, who's obviously defending the IBO lightweight title. Look, long story short, I think that she's actually gonna try, and I think the fact she's gonna try is gonna make Caroline look better, but I'm not sure if Caroline gets the stoppage here. This girl's young, same with Caroline, she's 22, whereas Caroline's 23. You know, I know people from Houston, I know people from Texas in general. For the most part, a lot of them are very prideful, and I don't think she's going to come to lay down off of a shot. So even if she gets knocked down, I do think she will get back up and sort of make a go of it. I can see it go in the 10-round distance, with Caroline winning a unanimous like 10-0 decision, or maybe even 9-1 if Miranda gets lucky. If it does get stopped, I wouldn't be surprised either. Maybe later rounds, round 7, between round 7 to 9. But if it gets to that 10th round, it's going to points in my opinion. But Caroline wins hands down. Adam Mazin versus Enoch Paulson. Paulson's only made the 140-pound limit twice in the last, I think, 4.5 years. So he's had terrible knee injuries. He's had bad shoulder injuries before, which has hampered his performances. Obviously, like, that's the reason he ended up having to vacate his EBU title, but he never lost it in the ring. Undefeated guy. not much of a puncher, which is going to suit Adam Azeez, as he's not been put in with any punches yet. But he's going to be tricky. He's going to be able to navigate the ring. So while I think this may actually be a very good solid step up test for Azeez, I do expect him to win. I'm predicting it to go points because Paulson has very much of a amateur background. He's sort of boxed all over the world. He seems to be very confident, and I don't think he's gonna be prepared to quote unquote get laid out by the guy that he still calls a boy. So yeah, I think it's gonna go points, but I think it's gonna be quite a comfortable, dominant Adam Azeez win. That's my prediction for that one. And last but not least, we've got Joshua Buatsi versus Dan Azeez. Now, I've saved the best till last. And this might actually be a bit of a long segment, so I apologize. I will put all the timestamps in the description below for you to skip to your favorite part. But look, here we go. So this is the battle of Lewisham versus Croydon. Dan Azeez versus Joshua Buatsi, or Joshua Buatsi, as you know. I guess people are gonna have to start learning. Look, so this fight, let's get down to it. How is it won and lost? Because we've seen everything else, we know everything else with regards to this. So keys to victory for Joshua Buatsi. Ultimately, he's got to, number one, establish his jab and establish the jab from early. And he's got to make that jab impactful. It's got to be a ramrod jab. It can't just be a rangefinder or a stab jab. It's got to be something that deters Dan Azeez from stepping in and, you know, sort of coming forward in an aggressive manner. It's got to make him double think his opinions. Also, when Dan does jump in, he's got to then, knowing that Dan will usually dip his head down to try and keep his head center line on the chest, he's got to shoot the uppercut. He's got to be looking for the uppercut. He's got to be looking for ways to split Dan's guard when he decides that he wants to sort of, you know, exit through the front door in quick fashion. I think the third key to victory for him is he's got to be able to dictate the pace of the fight. If he can manage the pace from this first round all the way to the 12th or less, then he wins the fight very comfortably, because he's going to be picking all the shots he wants to pick at his own pace, at his timing, which means that he can manage his power reserve so he can throw everything into every shot that he chooses. The keys to victory for Dan Azeez: first, you've got to break the guard of Joshua Buatsi. You've got to get in range of that of his longer reach. You've got to get in early by popping your double jab, the springboard jab. You've got to offset his rhythm, so every time that he wants to reset and counter, you've got to be there and inside that guard, constantly making him work. The second key to victory for Dan Azeez: forget the head especially for the first half of the fight. Just use your jab as a way to get yourself in, to maybe snap his head back, but just to bother him up there so you can get on the inside and dig to the body. Like, you've got to smash the body, you've got to hit the body constantly, and you've got to keep backing him up, and you can't let him get any sort of foothold, especially in center ring. You've got to take center ring, and you've got to make him have to fight moving backwards, because when you move backwards, you end up using more energy than when you move forward. The third key to victory for Dan Azeez, for me, is if it gets into that sort of second half, he's got to then throw combinations again, and it's more about that work rate. He's got to make sure that he constantly has Buatsi either defending or working in the round. There's no in-betweens. He can't be in there being allowed to have a walkabout, to catch his breath, to set up new attacks. You've got to be on him constantly, but also being very aware of what's coming back at you, making sure that your defense is extremely tight when you are entering into that kill box, as a lot of people call it. So ultimately, how do I see this fight playing out? I see in those first couple of rounds, I see that Dan has to start quick. He's not gonna have any feel out rounds. He's ultimately, I think he's going to start employing that jab from early. From the first few seconds of round number 1, I feel like he's going to try and take the initiative to show that, okay, you used to get the best of me in sparring back in the day, but this is a totally different Azeez. This ain't the guy that you even last sparred with last year or the year before that. Like, this is a whole different guy. He's basically got to bring that mentality whereby there's nothing you can do that's going to stop me from moving forward and taking you out. Now, in that same vein, I feel like Buatsi is going to try to establish the jab, and I think he's going to start thinking about his footwork. The same thing Virgil Hunter's been teaching him, trying to work on his footwork, trying to work his way into angles. And I feel like he's going to try to start throwing, left hooks more than anything else. He's gonna be pushing the left hook off of a straight jab, trying to offset Dan and make him have to move around to his left, which therefore gives Buatsi the opportunities to start bringing the right hand into play. But I feel after sort of 2 or 3 rounds, when you're looking at both of them, I can see that Dan Azeez's gas tank starts to basically take over, and the fact that his conditioning is he's a bit more on job. His pacing is a lot better in fights than what Buatsi's is, and ultimately I think because of that, as the fight starts to get further and further, Dan is still on his first win. I think Buatsi's going to be sort of struggling to find his second win at this point, and he's going to be possibly losing rounds on activity while he's trying to maybe pot shot. He's probably picking up a decent shot here or there, but Dan's able to weather that storm, but keep pushing forward all the way till we get to sort of like round 8, round 9. And at this point, I feel is when Joshua Buatsi is able to get that second wind, and he actually then is able to start coming forward, and it's Dan has now got to basically start managing his reserves, managing his gas tank, and the fight gets closer and closer up until sort of that 11th to 12th round. And I think in that round, the rule book, the tactics, everything goes out the window. When it hits those championship rounds, I feel like both guys are ultimately just going to go for it, and it's whoever's got enough energy to throw more punches, landed or not. And in that moment, I feel as if Dan Azeez will have just enough extra in the tank to be able to eke out a points decision on the cards. So my prediction for the fight is Dan Azeez to win on points, maybe a split decision, or at least that's what my prediction would have been in October when this fight was originally announced to take place. Then the back injury happened. Now, I spoke to Dan yesterday, and he said, look, he wouldn't take this fight now if his back wasn't okay. He wouldn't want to rob himself of the chance to win, or the fans. But my concern is that when you have a back injury, when you have a leg injury, anytime you've got an injury, that is always in the back of your mind somewhere. And it only takes not even like an injury. All it takes is a slight twinge, one small twinge, one small tweak that doesn't affect it, but you all of a sudden start remembering how it felt. And in this fight, you don't have the opportunity to have the chance to start thinking about, oh damn, I felt that, I wonder, am I gonna hold up? Because that's gonna be in the back of your mind. It is with anyone, whether you're an athlete, top level athlete, whether you're just a regular person. These things just happen. And my concern is also, Dan is a very flexible sort of very flexible with good dexterity. He's always able to sort of move well. My issue is what happens if the back either doesn't seize up necessarily, but it just isn't, he's not as flexible as he used to be. Maybe now his steps are a little bit slower than they were prior. Maybe he's not moving as fluidly as he used to. All of these things to me are play into my head, into my decision for this. And if we talk about obviously the weigh-ins and stuff from earlier, I also now think he's got Joshua Buatsi that's not seeing this as just business. I feel like maybe he's now taking it a little bit more personal, feeling that he's been disrespected, not just by Dan, but by everyone else prior, to think that, you know, you guys really thought this man's on my level. Like, you know, I'm the one that used to help him with sparring. Like, watch what happens now. And I feel like he's going to have that chip. So I feel like he's going to go in there with some extra spite. So provided that his gas tank holds out, or he gets the shots that he's looking for in those early rounds. Whereas before, in October, my prediction was Dan Azeez to win this fight on points. Unfortunately now, based on all the information that's kind of happened and the situation and everything, I feel like Dan Azeez is a much better guy when he's got momentum. Fighting every 3 to 4 months really works well for him. These extra 2.5 months, I feel as if they've evened the playing field in terms of the momentum, and you know, the activity is not that dissimilar from what Joshua had, and he's used to, I guess, now fighting once a year, so his inactivity won't be as big of a disadvantage now as Dan's loss of momentum. And so for that particular reason, I do now think that Joshua Buatsi wins this fight. And unfortunately, I think he wins it via knockout in about round 8 or 9. That's a hard thing for me to say. Obviously, everyone knows I'm friends with Dan, and I pray that I'm wrong. I want this to be the worst pick I've ever made, and he comes out and just dominates the fight from round 1 to round 12, or even gets his own stoppage round 6, 7, and does the business. And if he does, I will be the happiest guy in South London. But unfortunately, I can't do brethren bias. I have to be honest and impartial, and based on everything that's happened, my prediction is Joshua Buatsi to win by knockout in sort of the second or third, well, probably the third quarter. Like I said, rounds 8, 9, maybe round 10. But yeah, look, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know your opinions. If you think I'm wrong, put it down there, please. I want all of that, all of that wrong energy in the comments to make this an awful pick. But yeah, like, subscribe, share. Share with a friend, colleague, anyone else. Again, leave your comments. Thank you very much for watching. But for right now, that's Basis Picks locked.